So we got an email, Connor, from John Telly. Great email, love it, because it strokes my ego a bit. But other than that, it's very complimentary. And John, thanks for emailing. He writes, Anthony, I love OBI, but I work Wednesday evenings, which is when we record, so I can never watch it live. However, my wife and I look forward to watching the podcast every week. I'm sorry, John, and to Mrs. Telly, that you have to see this ugly mug every week, but we try and bring you good content regardless. I wanted to submit a question, and I'd love to hear you guys talk about it. I, along with a lot of fans, are worried about the offensive line. Is it still possible that we pick up a free agent after other teams start cutting their roster? And if we do, is O-line a position group that a player can join at the last minute and be able to play effectively without knowing the offense? Also, can you mention any names of possible free agents that the Bengals should be looking at? Well, I'm going to start and definitely want to get your thoughts. This is a great question. I think it's a great question, and thanks to John. And unfortunately, I don't know Mrs. Telly's first name, but Mr. and Mrs. Telly, thank you for tuning into the program. Thank you for submitting the question as well. I'm going to start with the last question, at least for me. Free agent names the Bengals should be looking at. Well, I'm going to circle back around with that to the fact of picking up a free agent. Yes, there are guys out there right now that you could currently use. If the Bengals, to me, were to add someone, it's going to be after cuts. It's going to be after the final cuts. And if you tune into the episode last week, we talked about rule changes. And one of the rule changes is basically there's not going to be set cut down days anymore. There's not going to be, multiple cuts. It's basically 90 to 53 right before the regular season starts. So that both makes things, it makes players desirable to a lot of other teams. And it also muddies the water for a lot of teams, because teams hold on to some of these guys. I do agree with John that offensive line, and I think Greg and others in the YouTube chat noted earlier tonight that the offensive line is the biggest question mark on this team, and likely the team getting back to the playoffs hinges on that group. I think there is a possibility, especially if there's an injury, if that the team could pick up a free agent. Who that might be, I think that depends on who's out there, who's cut, who the team finds valuable. I will say, to the question John posed, at least for me, and Connor, I'm going to get to your thoughts on all of this in a minute. Can a player join at the last minute and be able to play effectively? The only way they could do that is if they are guys that are familiar with the system, know what Paul Alexander wants to do, and or have versatility in terms of playing multiple spots. I think that's going to be key for anybody that the Bengals bring in terms of free agents and an offensive lineman. They have to be versatile, and they have to be affordable. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Connor, I think if a team signs a guy after week 2, it does something to it doesn't affect the cap, or there's certain salary obligations.
I don't know anything about cap stuff. Yeah, I don't know cap stuff.
All right, okay. I think if a team signs if a team signs a guy after week 2 in the regular season, they're not on the hook for certain salary obligations and things of that nature. But great question from John. Your thoughts, Connor?
Sorry. I think I really like the question. It's a really in-depth question here. I think you brought up a really good point with the whole the direct cut from 90 to 53. I never really considered that before today, even though I've kind of known that's been the new rule, and that's going to change a lot. I think a lot of teams have been kind of signing guys from, it also eliminates kind of a whole news day for us, which I don't know, that might be a good or a bad thing, but there used to be the 75-man cut day where that was, okay, well, who were the best guys that got cut from the 90-man roster to the 75-man roster? And usually none of these guys that get cut go on to be these superstars, but sometimes you get those interesting names where you're like, ooh, Nick Mangold, Orlando Franklin, these guys are available. Who's going to sign them, and then maybe a team eventually signs them. In terms of the Bengals, I don't think they're gonna be looking. I mean, I'm sure they'll have like a list of guys who they'll consider if other teams cut, but I mean, you look at what they've done this offseason, I would guess there probably aren't going to be any late signings that they use to replace. And even you just look at the roster. I mean, the Bengals clearly value, whether you think it's a weakness or a strength or you're neutral about it, the Bengals very much value players' experience in their system. They clearly, like, it's just guys always end up back in Cincinnati. Guys like Trey Hopkins who stick around often, get snaps and stuff like that over the guys who are inexperienced just because the team is more familiar with these players and more comfortable with the fact that they know these guys, know the system and the playbook and all that stuff. So in terms of asking whether or not O-line's a position where a guy's just going to be able to hop in, I would very highly doubt that. The Bengals really don't like to just sub in guys off the cuff. And any possible free agents they could or should be looking at. I mean, the obvious name is Nick Mangold. Do I think they're going to or should sign him? No. I mean, they have three centers on the roster. What are you going to do? I like Orlando Franklin just because he was on the Chargers, but he is not a guy that they should be signing. There really aren't any names on the market I would really want to sign. It would be a lot more, I would say, trade interest the Bengals would or should have, as opposed to signing, just because of the fact that they have so many players on their roster that there will be guys who they could potentially try to cut or place on the practice squad who end up for other teams, whereas most other teams in the league don't see that happen to their players necessarily. I mean, you saw Matt Langle last year go to the Patriots, who was the last player anyone thought would be picked up by an active roster, but then he goes to New England and ends up winning a ring, so good for him. But I think at the end of the day, you look at the Bengals roster and they're solid, and the team in itself values like experience and continuity. So it's hard to imagine a guy gets signed late and or comes in and just immediately starts playing.
If Jason Von Stein in the live YouTube chat had his way, the Bengals would sign Manu Ginobili as a free agent this year to play what position? I'm not sure.
I don't know, maybe kicker.
Yeah, maybe.
He's Argentinian.
Yeah, there you go. But that being said, there's also Tom Brooks in the YouTube chat said, "How about another Dunlap?" And of course, who he's referencing, and a guy you have to be familiar with, Connor, living in San Diego,
the
King Dunlap. Yes. And I believe he's still a free agent. He is 31 years old.
Yeah.
He's been in
6'9". He's crazy. He's so big. And his
gigantic.
name is King. He's like the most imposing person I've ever seen in my life.
Gigantic. I mean, he's a mammoth.
There was a viral picture of him. Anyone who's watching or listening, look this up. King Dunlap next to Danny Woodhead. It's one of my favorite pictures I've ever seen in my life. It's just this 6'9" guy standing next to Danny Woodhead, and it just makes Danny Woodhead look so small.
But he is 31. He's had some injury issues. There's Orlando Franklin, who you mentioned, and I believe there was an analysis of the Bengals off season. I think it was maybe ESPN or NFL.com. I can't remember who it was, but they gave the Bengals basically a C+ in terms of what they've done in free agency in the draft. And they said the move they need to make is Orlando Franklin, who is a talented guy and is a versatile guy, and a guard. And I think even though the Bengals probably think they have some form of, a Band-Aid in Andre Smith at the guard position, since Kevin Zeitler left in free agency, I mentioned it earlier in the program. It's a guy who's been injured, and it's a guy that, you want to count on this year, but him playing 16 games, 17 if you make the playoffs, that's been kind of rare in Andre Smith's history. So I do think you need to have some sort of contingency plan if you're the Bengals, and there are a lot of other guys. Brandon Fusco, I believe, is still available. Looks like Sebastian Vollmer is still available. If the list I'm looking at is up to date, King Dunlap, as I mentioned, Ryan Clady. But these are all guys that are older, have injury issues, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, most of those guys have injuries. Vollmer retired, but I know as specifically to Orlando and King, both of those guys have been banged up and have been pretty inconsistent. That being said, I think they'd be interesting backup options, but knowing the Bengals and the way they orchestrate their cap, it wouldn't really make sense because these guys would probably not command more money than like a young backup would or an Eric Winston who's been with the team for so long and just
Right.
takes kind of the minimum salary.
Right. And it unfortunately, I hate to say it, it's probably going to be either an unexpected cut or an injury to someone valuable that's going to prompt the team to make one of these types of moves. We've talked about how they're going to manage the roster this year. We'll talk more about that obviously as the summer months go on, but very interesting situations at running back, quarterback, wide receiver, defensive tackle, even corner. There's a lot of different safety. There's a lot of different position groups that are pretty crowded, have a lot of good guys. So they'll need to get creative. They'll need to get guys that can play multiple positions, and maybe they can find an offensive lineman who can play multiple positions. But kind of to tie a bow on John's email question, I think the team, and they're telling us this, whether it's verbally or what they're showing on the field, they are prepared to live and die by their top two selections in the 2015 draft, who are Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher. They are prepared. They drafted those guys because Andrew Whitworth was getting older, Andre Smith was getting older and approaching free agency. They drafted those guys specifically to be the next bookend tackles, whether it was Ogbuehi on the left or Fisher on the left or what have you. But they drafted those guys to be bookend tackles to replace Whitworth and Andre Smith. So far, it has not worked out well. Now they're starting. They're in their third years, and hopefully things will. If they pan out, this line could be great again because they're two high picks. You've got Andre Smith that could potentially be a Bobby Williams type of guy inside. And then Clint Bowling, if he comes back as healthy, he's a solid guard. Bodine has his issues, but if they pan out, this could be a pretty good offensive line. If they don't, I kind of chuckle, but I kind of worry for Andy Dalton's health this year because last year, from what we saw from Cedric Ogbuehi on the right side, was disastrous to be kind about it. There are a couple of other questions in the YouTube chat. Connor, I'm going to try and get to them. I'm scrolling through them. Tom Brooks asks, who's going to be the backup, since we're talking about offensive linemen, who's going to be the backup left tackle this offseason? Who do you think?
Good question. I think one of the most interesting guys on the roster right now is Eric Winston, just because he always manages to kind of stick on the roster on the back end. But you look at the Bengals offensive line, and like we've been saying, there's three guys who are probably going to be on the roster at center. You have at guard Clint Bowling, Trey Hopkins, Christian Westerman, Andre Smith. That's four. You could potentially add Alex Redmond, who'd be a fifth. You have the two tackles in Jake Fisher and Cedric Ogbuehi. So that's already, you're at like either 7 or 8 players on the offensive line. So they could, in theory, not even have Eric. You could, in theory, not keep Eric Winston and then make potentially like an Andre Smith or someone your backup tackle. That being said, it's hard to imagine anyone other than Eric Winston being that guy. I don't even know who Landon Leckler is, but apparently he's a potential backup left tackle. I don't know. Like you said, I think the Bengals really like to have versatility on their offensive line. So maybe it's a Christian Westerman or a Trey Hopkins, Trey Hopkins could, I guess, be an option as well. But I don't know. I think that it's probably going to be it's the tackles are going to be, on paper, Jake Fisher, Cedric Ogbuehi, and Eric Winston.
And that's how they've designed it. And like it or not, that's probably where one of the position groups the Bengals will go light, because they have so many guys that can play. They feel can play multiple positions. I mean, I believe Jake Fisher was a guard and a tackle at Oregon. Cedric Ogbuehi played all over the line at Texas A&M. Um, they feel that they've got versatile guys on this line, so that may be able to shave a roster spot or two at some of the aforementioned crowded position groups that I talked about. So I think it's interesting. It also, if it plays into the last question, if some of these guys aren't performing well in preseason or what have you, they they may they may go scouring for somebody that has guard tackle flexibility. Eric Winston, he's not going to light the world on fire. He had a couple of nice years throughout his career. Great locker room guy. Really kind of a play in a pinch type of guy at this point. But they might go searching for another guy like him around final cuts. And if they see whether it's an upgrade to Winston or, we get rid of a guy that many of us fans do not expect them to get rid of, then I think they might add, another guy that way. But for now, the tackle pool on this team is a little thin in terms of actual offensive tackles. And for now, it looks like Fisher, Ogbuehi, and Winston are kind of the locks. Maybe they keep one more or a guy that has guard tackle flexibility going forward. We're going to get out of here soon. I believe there was one more I wanted to talk about, and it was from Royal Flush 513. I have not heard too much about this, but it is an important question. What are the early reviews of the kicking game? As we saw last year, the kicking game can cost us 3 or 4 games, which is 3 or 4 games too many, obviously. That was really fun to talk about last season when we kept Mike Nugent was a weekly topic, if you remember, Connor. I haven't heard too much on the kicking game, but I guess, do you have any overall thoughts in terms of if you've heard anything, and or if you still expect Jake Elliott to be the guy this year, even this early in the offseason?
I mean, you expect them to win the competition, no doubt, but there's going to be a competition. I mean, the Bengals aren't a team that necessarily just gives slots to guys, and I don't know, maybe they will because they picked Jake Elliott in the 5th round. But if there's any year where they really could let a mid-round pick walk, it's definitely the year where they pick a kicker in the 5th round and picked like 4 guys after him or something like that. So, you hope he's a guy that, because like he had, he's the 5th round kicker. He had the good numbers. He even wore Tiger stripes on his helmet in college at one point for the Memphis Tigers. So, I mean, he had a cool helmet. Go look at his chrome helmet. It was kind of cool. Wish the Bengals would do that.
Eerily similar, right? Eerily similar.
I wish the Bengals would wear that helmet, but he had the numbers. He had, I mean, there's not really much you can say. I don't know. There's no like reports like the Buccaneers where you have Roberto Aguayo missing those like kicks inside the 8-yard wide field goal posts and stuff like that. You've heard they haven't been kicking a lot and whatever. I mean, I don't really feel one way or another about that. I'm sure that the team has its reasoning for whatever it does. But yeah, I think with Jake Elliott, I mean, it goes with every position. You hope the best guy wins. You hope every guy on the roster succeeds in whatever way he can. I mean, there's going to be fans who have their gripes with certain players, whether it's Adam Jones, Russell Bodine, Jeremy Hill, guys who the fans have just kind of soured on for various reasons. But for me, I'm always just a big proponent of just root for everyone to do their best. And that sounds really cliche, sounds really like rah-rah, like who cares really at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, as information continues to come out of training camp and all that stuff, I'm sure we'll have more information on that subject.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Unfortunately, in OTAs, I just don't think that the kicking game is something that's under the microscope, even though it should be for the Bengals. It should be based on last season and based on the listener question there. It cost them games, and you don't want to point in a team sport. You don't want to point the finger at one guy, but when you lose by 3-4 points, you tie a game. And there's missed field goals, mixed extra points. It's hard not to. The team, to their credit, addressed it this offseason. They re-signed Randy Bullock, whatever you think of him. And then they drafted Jake Elliott in the 5th round there, whatever you think of him. But you got to give the team credit. They addressed a need that wasn't, as you go through, you look at offensive line, you talk about certain positions. Obviously, special teams kind of falls down the pecking order, but they addressed it, and they're going to have some form of a competition. It's going to be interesting to see, what plays out there. My guess is you don't spend a pick on a kicker if you don't envision him, even if it's a 5th round pick, you don't spend one on a kicker if you don't envision him making some form of an immediate impact. Unfortunately for this question, I think it's going to take what we see in preseason, what we see in the early parts of the regular season to really gauge how the kicking game is doing. And while it's also a scary prospect, one of the things that might play into the favor, not of the kicking game, but of the Bengals offense, if they decide to go for 2 a little more often this year, they have a whole plethora of weapons that they could use to do so. 3 effective running backs in terms of Jeremy Hill, Giovanni Bernard, and Joe Mixon. They added John Ross, Josh Malone. So if they want to take a little more heat off of the kicking game than they did last year, maybe not play it so conservative, and they want to go for 2 because of the new rule changes when they moved back the extra point attempts. They have weapons to do that. They can spread it out. They can run the ball. They can do a lot of things to go for 2 points. Maybe that's part of the plan this year. We'll see. But unfortunately, it's going to take preseason games and regular season games to really sort it out. Depending on how most people don't care about preseason games in terms of results, you might happen to see some losses by the Bengals in the preseason that, they could win if they went for 2 or whatever, but this is a position that they need to sort out. So instead of going for 2 in the preseason and trying to win a game or tie a game or whatever, they may just kick extra points. They may kick field goals when you're like, oh, go for it on 4th down, because they want to see what they have in their field goal kickers this year. And, I don't really care. It always bums me out when the Bengals lose, but when you kind of look at it that way and you kind of see this is really a roster examination again this preseason, and this is one of the positions that's under high examination. I think it makes sense from that standpoint. Check out this program. You can check us out on iTunes, on Cincy Jungle, on SoundCloud, on YouTube. Subscribe to those channels. Subscribe to all of our content. We appreciate those who have already done so. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Connor, your Twitter handle again is Connor YB, is that right? At Connor YB?
It's YB Connor. And for those who don't know how to spell my name, it's CONNOR, because I know it's a hard name for people to spell.
I just switched it. That's all I did.
It's all good.
I'm at CJ Anthony CUI aside from that. But you can follow all of the content we release at Bengals OBI on Twitter. Get in touch with us, download us, watch us live every week on YouTube and on Cincy Jungle. If you're unable to catch us live, you can catch all of our stuff on SoundCloud, YouTube, Cincy Jungle, that sort of thing.